6 years. 6 years of early mornings, cold lunches eaten standing up, and smiling through teeth so clenched I thought they would crack. 6 years of working for a man who looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. And all it took to bring it all down was one phone call he made to Paris, standing in his office like he owned the entire world because he thought he did. Welcome to Daddy's Revenge. Get yourself comfortable. Get a snack. Maybe a drink. Because these stories are real, they are raw, and the people in them always had a choice. They just picked wrong. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment. Let's get into it. But I need to take you back before Paris. Before the phone call and the laughter and everything that followed. I need to take you back to a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of winter when I was standing in the supply room of Caldwell Pacific Holdings on the 22nd floor trying to fix a printer that had jam for the 4th time that week. The printer was not the problem. The printer was just where I happened to be standing when everything changed. My name is Marcus Webb. I was 39 years old. I had been working as head of logistics coordination for Caldwell Pacific for 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I knew the exact count because I had been counting. I was not supposed to be in the supply room that Tuesday. I was supposed to be in a budget review meeting on 23. But the printer had jammed and Donna from accounts had that look on her face, the one that meant somebody better fix it or she was going to make the afternoon very unpleasant for everyone. So I fixed it. And while I was pulling the crumpled paper out from the back panel, a thick white envelope slipped out with it. It had been sitting in the feed tray, wedged behind the drum cartridge, completely invisible unless you knew where to look. The return address on the envelope said Caldwell Pacific Holdings, Office of General Counsel, Internal Review. The date stamp was 18 months old, and it was addressed to the board of directors. I should have handed it to Donna and walked away. I did not do that. I took it to the bathroom on 21, the one nobody used because the ventilation was bad, and I read every single word. It was a legal memo, internal, marked confidential, and it was about a clause. Not just any clause. A clause that had been written into the original employment framework of Caldwell Pacific by the founding attorney back in 1991, when the company was still small enough to care about keeping good people. The clause was simple. It said this: any senior-level employee terminated without documented performance cause after a minimum of 5 years of uninterrupted service shall receive a mandatory equity disbursement of no less than 22% of the company's assessed value at the time of termination. 22%. I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on the floor of the bad ventilation bathroom and read it 5th time. I called my best friend Dennis that evening. We were at a sports bar near the stadium, the kind of place loud enough that nobody was listening to anyone else. Dennis has known me since we were 7 years old. He is the kind of man who says exactly what he thinks the moment he thinks it, which is either his best quality or his most dangerous one, depending on the day. I slid the copy across the table. He read it. He looked up. He read it again. Marcus. Yeah, that is 22% of a company worth somewhere around $400 million. I nodded. He picked up his drink. Set it down. Picked it up again. So if Warren fires you, he said. If Warren fires me without documented cause, I said. After 5 years. You have been there 6 years and 2 months. Dennis stared at me across the table for a long time. Then he said, does Nina know about this? Nina, my wife. The woman who had sat across the kitchen table from me more nights than I could count and listened to me talk about her father in a voice I tried to keep level and calm and mostly failed at. Nina Caldwell Webb, daughter of Warren Caldwell, founder and CEO of Caldwell Pacific Holdings. The man who had shaken my hand at our engagement dinner with the kind of grip that was not warmth, it was measurement, who had offered me a job at his company 6 months after our wedding, not because he believed in me, but because it was the most efficient way to keep me where he could see me, who called me son in meetings and buddy in private, and who had once told Nina at Christmas, in front of her mother and her sister and her aunt from Phoenix, that Marcus was the kind of man who needed guidance, not the kind who gave it. You need to tell Nina everything, Dennis said. I know. All of it. Everything. The clause, the plan, what you're thinking about doing. Because if there is anyone on this earth who deserves to watch her father finally face something he cannot charm or bulldoze his way out of, it is her. He was not wrong. He was completely and entirely right. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a place I had not let myself look at for a long time, I already knew it. But I needed someone to say it out loud before I let myself believe it was real. I went home that night, and I told Nina everything. I spread the document on the kitchen table under the overhead light. She read it slowly. Then she looked up at me, and something shifted in her face. Something quiet and old and long overdue. "Good," she said. That was all. Just good. Let me tell you about Nina before we go any further, because she is the spine of this story, not me. Nina Caldwell is 41 years old. She has a master's degree in organizational psychology, a gift for reading people that borders on unsettling, and a patience so deep and so disciplined that most people mistake it for gentleness. It is not gentleness. It is precision. She grew up in the Caldwell house on Mercer Island, the kind of house where everything was beautiful and nothing was warm. Warren Caldwell was not a man who raised his voice. He did not have to. He had other tools. He had silence. He had the way he would look at Nina's mother Carol across the dinner table when she said something he found embarrassing, a look so flat and so brief that if you blink you missed it, but Carol never missed it. Nobody in that house missed it. Warren had built Caldwell Pacific from a modest freight brokerage that his uncle had left him into a major holdings company over 30 years. He was proud of this. He reminded everyone of this. He said things like, "I started with nothing," when in fact he had started with an uncle's company and a family loan and a talent for acquiring other people's work and calling it vision. Nina had watched her mother shrink over 20 years. Not all at once. Slowly. The way a plant shrinks when it does not get enough light. Carol Caldwell had been a landscape architect before she married Warren. She had published papers. She had won awards. By the time Nina was in high school, Carol spent most of her time making sure the house looked exactly the way Warren wanted it to look and apologizing for things that were not her fault. Carol left when Nina was 24. She did not leave dramatically. She simply stopped. She stopped arranging herself around his moods. She stopped smoothing things over at dinner parties. She stopped being small. One morning, she called a moving company, had her things taken to her sister's house in Portland, and filed for separation by the end of the week. Warren's response was to be publicly bewildered and privately ruthless. The divorce took 3 years. Carol came out the other side with less than she deserved and more than she had expected, which says something specific about what expectations had become inside that marriage. Nina never forgave her father for those 3 years. She did not stop speaking to him. She was too smart for the kind of rupture that only punishes you. She maintained a relationship with the surgical care of someone who has decided that the most powerful thing they can do is stay in the room and watch. So when I came along, a man from a regular family with a regular background who had built a decent career through actual work and who had the audacity to fall in love with Warren Caldwell's daughter, Warren's response was exactly what you would expect from a man like him. He decided I was a project. He gave me a job at his company and then spent 6 years making sure I understood that the job was a favor and favors come with a price. The price was daily. It was in the way he walked past my office without stopping. In the performance reviews where he praised my effort in the same tone you use to compliment a child's drawing. In the all-hands meetings where he introduced me as Nina's husband, not by my title, not by my name first. In the birthday card from the company signed by everyone except him. The thing about Warren Caldwell was that he was not stupid. He was not even obviously cruel. He was precise. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply and exactly where to apply it so that nothing left a visible mark. He had been doing this for 40 years, and he was very, very good at it. What he was not good at was reading the room when the room had changed. What he did not know was that the room had changed a night I sat down on a bathroom floor on 21 and read a confidential legal memo that had been sleeping in a printer feed tray for 18 months. The room had changed. He just did not know it yet. The plan was simple. Simple the way the best plans always are, the kind of simple that takes enormous discipline to maintain. I needed to complete year 5 with 0 documented performance issues. I was already at 6 years, which meant the threshold was cleared. What I needed was for Warren to fire me, without cause, which meant I needed to do my job so well and conduct myself so cleanly that there was absolutely nothing he could put on paper And I needed to be patient enough to wait for him to do what men like Warren always eventually do: act from emotion when they believe no one is watching. The hard part was not the job. I had always been good at the job. The hard part was the waiting. 6 months of knowing what I knew and saying nothing. 6 months of good mornings and budget reports and nods across conference tables. Nina was extraordinary during those months. I want you to understand what it cost her to sit in Sunday dinners at the house on Mercer Island and listen to her father talk about the company, knowing what she knew and show nothing on her face. Nina has her mother's warmth and her father's control. She deployed the control like a surgeon during those 6 months and never slipped once. Not once. We talked about everything at home, at the kitchen table, quietly, after our daughter Lily was asleep. We talked about where we would go after. We talked about what it would mean for Carol. We talked about what we wanted our life to look like in a year when none of this was a daily weight we were carrying. We had bought a small piece of land in the Willamette Valley 2 years before. We had not done anything with it yet. Nina started drawing floor plans on Tuesday nights. The break was Dennis's idea, technically. It came up in April when we were doing our taxes and looking at 6 years of unused vacation time sitting in my employment account. "You have literally never taken a real vacation," Dennis said. "Marcus, you have 240 hours of approved paid leave sitting there untouched." "I know. Take the Paris trip. Nina has been asking about it for 3 years." "I know. So take it. Get Warren to approve it. Make him approve it in writing through proper channels. Make it official. Let him see you go. And then wait." I understood immediately what Dennis was thinking. Warren had never been able to tolerate the idea that the world kept moving when he was not supervising it. He had fired 3 people in 10 years for taking long weekends he had not personally blessed. Giving him a 2-week Paris trip to sit with was like handing a certain kind of man a rope and waiting. I submitted the vacation request through the official HR portal on a Monday morning. I CC'd our HR director, Paulette. I attached the documentation showing my accumulated leave balance. I noted that I had not taken a vacation in 6 years of employment. I requested 2 weeks beginning the 15th of June. Warren approved it in 40 minutes. I think he approved it because he thought he was being watched and wanted to appear reasonable. I think he approved it because he assumed I would check in constantly, would be unable to actually disconnect, would demonstrate by my behavior across the ocean exactly what he had always believed, that I needed him more than he needed me. He was wrong about that. I did not check in once. Nina and I flew to Paris on a Thursday evening. We landed Friday morning, dropped our bags at the hotel, and walked out into the city like 2 people who had been holding their breath for 6 years and had finally been allowed to exhale. I want to tell you about Paris the way it actually was because it matters to the story. It matters because for 2 weeks, I was not Marcus Webb, head of logistics coordination, son-in-law of Warren Caldwell, a man waiting for a trap to spring. I was just a person in Paris with his wife. We walked everywhere. We ate slowly. We sat in the Luxembourg Gardens on a Tuesday afternoon and did absolutely nothing for 3 hours, and it was the best 3 hours I could remember in years. Lily called us every morning from her grandmother Carol's house in Portland, where she was staying for the trip, and told us about the garden. The call came on a Friday. We were at a small cafe near the Marais, the kind of place with 4 tables outside and a chalk menu on a board and coffee. So good it felt like an apology for every bad cup you had ever had. I had my phone face up on the table because Lily was supposed to call at 10. At 9:47, it lit up. Warren Caldwell. I looked at Nina. She looked at the phone. I picked it up. Warren's voice was the voice of a man who had been stewing for days. I could hear in the way he exhaled before he started speaking. "What exactly do you think you're doing over there?" It was not a question. I said I was on an approved vacation. He said, "I do not care what Paulette approved. You think the company runs itself while you sit in a cafe in France like some kind of tourist?" I said, "Actually, I'm a tourist. That is the point of vacation." He did not like that. He went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "You know what? I am done carrying passengers. You are finished. Effective immediately. We do not need lazy pigs on the payroll." I laughed. I could not help it. It came out clean and real, the way laughter does when something is exactly as absurd as you always knew it would be. I said, "Okay, Warren, You have a great day. And I hung up before he could finish whatever he was going to say next. Nina looked at me across the table. The coffee between us was still hot. Was that it? She said. That was it. She picked up her cup. Then, I guess we should enjoy the rest of the trip. We stayed the full 2 weeks. I want to be clear about that. We did not rush home. We did not panic. We walked along the Seine on a warm Saturday evening. We went to the Musée d'Orsay on a rainy Wednesday and stood in front of paintings for as long as we wanted. Nina bought Lily a small stuffed bear from a shop near Notre Dame. I slept 8 hours a night, every night for the first time in 6 years. Warren Caldwell sent me 2 more calls that I did not answer, 1 email that I did not reply to, and 1 message through his assistant that said my termination paperwork was being processed. I forwarded all of it to our personal attorney, James Okafor, with a subject line that said, as expected. James replied in 4 minutes. Understood. I will be in touch Monday. James Okafor is 55 years old. He has been practicing employment and corporate law for 28 years. He is the kind of attorney who speaks at conferences and whose name appears in footnotes of published legal decisions, and who charges a rate that makes your hand shake a little when you sign the engagement letter. I had retained James 8 months earlier on Dennis's recommendation. James had read the clause twice, looked up the founding documents of Caldwell Pacific, reviewed the employment law landscape in our state, and told me in a very calm voice that what I had found was not a gray area. It is not ambiguous, he said, sitting across from me in his office with the downtown skyline behind him. It is explicit. It is enforceable. And the fact that their general counsel apparently buried it in an internal memo 18 months ago without acting on it tells me that somebody in that building knows exactly what it says and hoped it would stay buried. He had been preparing for 9 months. We flew home on a Sunday evening. Dennis picked us up from the airport. He did not say anything when he saw us. He just hugged Nina, then hugged me, then drove us home without the radio on. On the drive, he said, "Everything is ready. James has the filings prepared. The board notification goes out tomorrow morning." I know. Lily was asleep when we got home. Carol had brought her back that afternoon. She was in her bed with the stuffed bear from Paris tucked under her arm. Nina stood in the doorway of her room for a long time. I stood behind her. Neither of us said anything because there was nothing that needed to be said. The next morning was Monday, and Monday was when everything really started. James sent the formal notice to Caldwell Pacific's board of directors at 9 in the morning. It was 6 pages long. It cited Section 12, subsection D of the original Caldwell Pacific Employment Framework, the clause, the full text, the applicable date of my hire, my uninterrupted tenure, the documented absence of any performance cause, and Warren's verbal termination delivered via phone call on the 15th of June, recorded with proper disclosure. It requested formal recognition of my equity entitlement within 14 business days. At 9:42, Warren's personal attorney called James. At 9:51, Warren himself called James and was told he would need to communicate through counsel. At 10:15, the board chair, a woman named Sylvia Marsh, called James directly and asked for a meeting at her earliest availability. James said Thursday would work. Sylvia said she would make Thursday work. I should tell you about Sylvia Marsh because she matters to this story in ways that are worth understanding. Sylvia had been on the Caldwell Pacific board for 11 years. She had come onto the board as an independent director brought in at a time when the company was trying to present a cleaner governance structure to institutional investors. She was a former CFO. She was sharp, careful. In the years I had worked at Caldwell Pacific, I had watched her in quarterly meetings with the quiet attention of someone trying to understand the actual power structure of a room. Sylvia liked Warren the way you can like someone who is useful to you while knowing exactly who they are. She was not his ally. She was not his enemy. She was a professional, and professionals, in my experience, respond to enforceable legal obligations with a particular kind of calm efficiency that is the most effective thing in the world when you are on the right side of the document. Thursday came with overcast skies and the kind of humid morning that makes Seattle feel like it is breathing on you. I dressed carefully, not to impress. To be correct, there is a difference. Nina made coffee while I knotted my tie at the hallway mirror. She handed me the mug without a word. She had taken a day off from her practice, not to attend the meeting. She would not be there in the room. She would be somewhere better. I drove to the Caldwell Pacific building. I parked in the visitor lot for the first time in 6 years. That felt meaningful. I did not need a key card anymore. I walked into the lobby and met James at the elevator bank at 8:55. He was wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a flat leather portfolio and had the expression of a man who had already won and was simply attending the formality. The conference room on 23 was full. Sylvia at the head of the table. 3 other board members. Warren's outside attorney, a man named Forsyth, 60-ish, silver hair, the posture of someone who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him. 2 members of the internal legal team. And at the far end, Warren. He looked the way powerful men look when they realize the room has changed without their permission. He looked older than usual. He looked like a man who had spent the last 10 days trying to find a door and kept arriving at a wall. James distributed copies of the notice, the clause, the documentation, and a timeline that went back to my first day of employment. Forsyth said the clause was potentially unenforceable on 3 grounds, which he then listed. James addressed each ground in sequence, without hurrying, with the specific patience of someone who had anticipated all 3 arguments and prepared for all 3 arguments, and was mildly disappointed that there were only 3. Sylvia listened to all of it. Then she said, "Howard, is there an argument here that we have not heard?" Forsyth looked at his notes. He looked at James. He looked at his notes again. "The clause is legally sound," he said. "The conditions appear to have been met. His client may have cause for a wrongful termination counterargument based on conduct, but we would need documentation of specific incidents, and I have not seen any documentation." "There is no documentation," James said pleasantly, because there were no incidents. The room was quiet. Warren said, "This is a manipulation." His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, something that had not been there the times I had watched him run these kinds of rooms before. He said, "Marcus has been a drain on this company's culture for years, and everyone in this building knows it." Sylvia looked at him. "Do you have documentation of that, Warren?" He did not answer. She turned to the room. "Then I think we know where we are." It was not the board meeting where everything fell apart for Warren. The board meeting was just the moment where the walls became visible. The falling apart came in the days that followed, the way real collapses always do, one accumulating thing after another. Paulette from HR, who had processed 6 years of Warren's undocumented decisions, walked into James's office on the Friday after the board meeting with a box of files and an expression on her face that looked like a woman setting down a weight she had been carrying for a very long time. She said she wanted to talk about a few things she had been uncomfortable with for several years. James said he had time. By the following week, 9 current and former employees had made contact with James's office. The issues ranged from wrongful termination to hostile work environment complaints to a wage and hour matter that had been quietly shelved 3 years ago at Warren's request. Each person had their own story. Together, the stories formed a pattern that was not subtle. The pattern was the kind of pattern that does not go away once it becomes visible. It compounds. Forsyth called James on a Wednesday morning and said in a very careful voice that his client was exploring options. James said his client was looking forward to a resolution. There was a pause on the line. "What kind of resolution are we talking about?" Forsyth said. "The kind my client is entitled to under Section 12, subsection D, plus applicable damages given the circumstances," James said. "And the other matters? Those are between those individuals and their counsel. But they are moving forward." Another pause. "I see," Forsyth said. "I will be in touch." Nina knew about the employee complaints before I did. Not because she had orchestrated them. She had not. She had simply spent years maintaining careful, respectful relationships with people at the company at family events and gatherings, the way people do when they're thoughtful and consistent and genuinely interested in others. When the news of my termination and the equity claim became known inside the building, some of those people reached out to her first. She listened to each one. She gave each one James's contact information. She did not tell them what to do. She did not need to. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be trustworthy for long enough that when the moment comes, people know where to go. Warren hired a second attorney, then a third. The legal bills began to accumulate in a way that Forsyth described to him as untenable. Warren's response to things becoming untenable had historically been to apply more pressure. The problem was that pressure requires leverage, and leverage requires having something the other person needs. He did not have that anymore. What he had was a clause he could not erase, a board that was watching him with new and specific attention, and 9 former employees whose complaints gave the story a shape that no amount of pressure could change. Sylvia called him into a board meeting on a Thursday morning. I do not know everything that was said in that meeting. What I know is that Warren Caldwell submitted his resignation as CEO of Caldwell Pacific Holdings at 4:17 that afternoon. The board accepted it before 5 o'clock. There's a thing that happens when a man who has run a room for 30 years is no longer in the room. The room does not grieve. The room rearranges itself quickly and practically and gets on with business. The board appointed Sylvia as interim CEO within a week. The equity claim was settled in mediation 22 days after the original notice. I will not give you the number. I will tell you it was fair. It was what the clause said it would be, and the clause had been written when the company was worth a great deal, and the company was worth a great deal. James shook my hand outside the mediator's office and said, "That is the cleanest case I have tried in 11 years. I said, "I had a good teacher." He said, "You had a good clause." Dennis took us out to dinner that night. The 4 of us, me and Nina and Dennis and his wife Priya, at a restaurant downtown with white tablecloths and a wine list that was longer than most novels. Priya had known about the plan for months and had said nothing to anyone, which is one of the many reasons she and Dennis deserve each other. Dennis ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. He did this without looking at the price. He did this the way a man does when he has been waiting 2 years to order it. We did not talk about Warren over dinner. We talked about Lily, who had started drawing horses. We talked about the land in the Willamette Valley and what we wanted to build there. We talked about Carol, who had heard the full story from Nina over the phone and had sat in silence for a moment, and then said, "I hope he finally understands what it costs," and then asked if Lily wanted to spend a week at the coast this summer. I want to tell you what happened to Warren because it is not a story about a man being destroyed. It is a story about a man meeting the weight of what he built. He did not lose everything. He still had his personal assets, his house on Mercer Island, the investments he had made outside the company over 30 years. What he lost was the company, the room he had run, the title, the daily experience of being the most powerful person in every room he entered. For a man whose identity was constructed entirely from that experience, the loss of it was the thing. I heard from Paulette, who I stayed in touch with, that he had tried to come back to the office twice in the weeks after his resignation to collect personal items and had arrived at a building that had already moved on. His key card was deactivated. The parking spot with his name on it had been reassigned. Small things, precise things, the kind of things that communicate what cannot be said out loud. Nina called Carol the week the settlement was finalized. I was in the kitchen making dinner when she walked in with the phone against her shoulder and that expression on her face, the one that is not quite a smile and not quite something else, the one that is the expression of a woman who has been carrying something for a long time and has just been allowed to set it down. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where we had spread out the documents 2 years ago and changed everything. I heard her tell Carol the number. I heard Carol on the other end, quiet for a long time. Then Carol said, "I want you and Marcus and Lily to come to Portland this weekend. Just come. Let us just be together." Nina said yes, without hesitating. We drove to Portland on a Saturday morning. Lily sat in the back with her sketchbook and drew horses the whole way. Carol met us in the driveway of her small house near the river with her sleeves rolled up and her gardening gloves still on because she had been in the backyard. She hugged Lily first, the way grandmothers do when a grandchild arrives, like the arrival is the best thing that has happened all week. Then she hugged Nina for a long time. Then she looked at me over Nina's shoulder and she said, "Thank you, Marcus." Just that. 2 words. I said, "You do not need to thank me." She said, "I know I do not need to. I am doing it anyway." We spent the whole day in Carol's garden. We ate outside. Lily fell asleep in a lawn chair at 6 in the evening with grass stains on her knees and the stuffed Paris bear under her arm. It was the best Saturday I could remember. Dennis and I talked about it months later after we had moved to the valley. He came to visit on a long weekend, and we sat on the porch in the evening watching the light move across the vineyard next door. He asked me when I had known it would work. I thought about it. I told him the truth. I always knew the clause was real. I always knew the math was right. What I did not know was whether I had the patience to wait for Warren to be Warren without blinking first. He looked at me. Did you almost blink? Once I said, about 4 months in. There was a performance review where he sat across from me and said things with such practiced casualness that I could feel how much he wanted me to react. He wanted me to say something he could write down. I sat on my hands under the table and thought about the bathroom on 21 and the document in my pocket and said, "Thank you for the feedback, Warren. I appreciate the clarity." His jaw tightened. That was the moment I knew he was going to give me exactly what I was waiting for. Patience is not passive. That is something I want you to understand. Patience is not sitting still and hoping. Patience is doing the work while you wait. For 2 years, I was the best logistics coordinator Caldwell Pacific had. Not because I owed them that. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. Because if there was going to be no documented cause for termination, there could genuinely be no cause. I ran clean. I documented everything. I maintained every deadline. I left a paper trail of competence so thorough that when Forsyth said his client might have cause arguments, he was describing a cliff he did not have a rope for. Warren knew it too. That is why when he finally cracked on that Friday morning in Paris, he did not cite a performance reason. He called me a lazy pig from 3,000 miles away because he was out of anything real to say. Nina went back to her practice 3 weeks after we settled. She sees private clients for organizational coaching, and she is so good at it that her schedule stays full by word of mouth alone. She did not tell her clients what had happened, not the specifics, but she told me one evening that she had noticed something shift in the way she worked. She said, "I spent years watching my father manage people by making them feel small. Watching what happens when that kind of management finally meets something it cannot move." She paused. "I think I am better at this work now." I asked why. "Because I really believe it now," she said, "that people are not resources to manage. They are people. You can build something with people, or you can use them until they break. One of those strategies has a ceiling." I looked at her across the table and thought, for maybe the 10,000th time, that she was the sharpest person I had ever met. Lily started 2nd grade that fall. She goes to a small school near our property in the valley, the kind of school with vegetable gardens and a lot of outside time. She told me one evening at dinner that her teacher had asked the class what their parents did for work. I asked what she said. She said, "My dad used to work for my grandpa, but he figured out something important in a bathroom, and now we live on a farm." I said, "That is a very accurate summary." She said, "My teacher wanted more details." I said, "Tell her it was a long story." She said, "I know. You always say that." She went back to drawing horses. Nina looked at me across the table. We were quiet for a second. Then we both laughed, the real kind, the kind that only happens when you are exactly where you are supposed to be. I want to tell you the last part of this story because it is the part that matters most to me. It happened about 8 months after we left Seattle. I was at the hardware store in town buying wire fencing for the back of the property. I was standing in the aisle trying to figure out the difference between 2 different gauges when my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize with a Seattle area code. I almost did not answer. I answered. It was Warren. He sounded different, not small. Warren Caldwell will never sound small, but different in the way a man sounds when he is talking to you without the room behind him, without the title, without the architecture of power he has spent 30 years building around himself. He sounded like a man talking to his son-in-law. That was all. Just a man. He said he was calling because Nina had told him we were settled in. He said he thought he should call. He did not apologize, not directly. Warren Caldwell does not do direct apologies the way most people do them. What he did was say that he had been thinking a lot about how he had run things. He said he had a meeting with Sylvia recently, and she had said some things that were hard to hear and were probably overdue. He said he had heard that Lily was happy at the new school. He asked if she still liked horses. I told him she was drawing them constantly. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "I have a friend with a ranch about an hour from where you are. He does trail rides. Maybe Lily would like to go." I stood in the hardware store aisle for a moment. Then I said, "I think she would like that very much, Warren. We did not fix everything. I want to be honest about that. You do not fix 30 years of a certain kind of behavior with a phone call in a hardware store. What you can do is leave the door unlocked. Warren came to visit last spring. He brought Lily a book about horses. She showed him her sketchbook. He sat at our kitchen table and drank the coffee I made and looked out the window at the valley and said, "You picked a good place." I said, "Nina picked it." He looked at me for a second. Then he said, "She always had better judgment than me." I did not say anything. I let it sit in the room where it belonged. Some sentences do not need a response. They just need to be said out loud. Finally, in the presence of someone who was there for all the years they were not being said. Carol came to visit the following month. She brought tomato seedlings from her garden and spent 2 days in our yard with Lily planting them in a raised bed along the south fence. On the second evening, she and Nina sat on the porch after Lily was in bed, and I brought them both tea and then went inside because some conversations are not mine to sit in. But I could hear them through the open window. Not the words, just the sound of two women talking the way people talk when they're finally on the other side of something long and heavy. The kind of talking that sounds like breathing. I washed the dishes and listened to it and thought about a rainy Tuesday afternoon and a jam printer and an envelope that had been waiting 18 months in a feed tray for exactly the right person to find it. Dennis called last Sunday. He calls every Sunday. It is the most consistent thing in my life, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. He and Priya are thinking about buying a small place near us. He said, "I just want to be somewhere I can see the sky when I look out the window." I said, "I know exactly what you mean." He asked if I missed it. Seattle, the company, the 22nd floor, the whole weight of it. I thought about the printer and the bathroom and the legal memo. I thought about 6 years of good mornings and swallowed sentences and performance reviews and being introduced as Nina's husband in rooms full of people who knew my name. I thought about a cafe near the Marais on a warm Paris morning and coffee so good it felt like permission. Not even a little, I said. Some men spend their whole lives building walls. Warren Caldwell spent 30 years building the most impressive walls he could find and called them a company. And they were impressive. Nobody is taking that away from him. But walls have a foundation, and foundations have documents, and documents have clauses, and clauses, it turns out, are the most patient things in the world. They just sit there in the dark in a filing tray, waiting for someone stubborn enough to read them all the way to the end. 6 years of good mornings. One clause. One patient man in a bad ventilation bathroom who did not put the envelope back. And a woman who had been watching and waiting and keeping her own quiet count since she was a little girl in a house on Mercer Island where dinner parties were the place her mother learned to make herself invisible. They chose wrong. They always had the choice to choose differently. They just never did. Not until the room changed without their permission. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and subscribe to Daddy's Revenge for more real stories told straight. The way they actually happened, no polish, no filter, just the truth and the people in it. Drop a comment and tell me what you thought. And as always, thank you for being part of this community.